Last but not least, I am really honored to introduce Susan Bowman to you all. Susan has worked as a secondary school counselor, a licensed professional counselor, and a social worker specializing in helping troubled teens and their families. She co-founded Developmental Resources, an educational consulting company, and Youthlight, Inc., which many of you may have heard of, an educational publishing company. Susan is currently co-owner of Youth Hope Consulting LLC, and she's authored or co-authored more than 20 books and programs. She's also a former dropout, and she shares her experiences in all of her writing. And with that, I'll turn it over to you, Susan.
Okay. Well, it's kind of hard when you can't see everybody, but I'm really excited that you're all here and we have people from all over the United States. That's very exciting. And thank you so much for taking time out of, I know you probably had a very busy day, and to come on here and listen a little bit about my book and just some of the insights that I might have. Yes, I am a former dropout. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. So I will first share what I am hoping, just some points that you can get out of today, that I want to talk about how it starts with you, because we can't help kids who drop out unless we start with ourselves. Understanding sometimes unseen reasons that students give up on school and do drop out, and then looking at how you can help or how your school can help. So three main points that I'm just hoping I can address today. And I'm very grateful to Corwin for doing this and honored that they would actually publish my book. Yes, I own a publishing company and I could have done it through ours, but I just value Corwin a lot, and I was very pleased that they wanted to actually publish my book. So thank you to Corwin for that. So I'm going to start by sharing my story. The picture that you see on the screen of me in middle school was actually an APB, all points bulletin, for those of you that don't know, when I dropped out and ran away from home. So I left home at 14, and it was to escape a lot of dysfunction in my family. But backing up to my elementary years, I started having trouble as young as second and third grade. I had reading comprehension problems, learning disabilities, and it got worse as we started having issues in my family. By time I got to fifth grade, I had a father who actually had a nervous breakdown and was institutionalized in a mental hospital. And then I had a sister who actually tried to take her own life and shot herself, and that was in our home. She survived, but it was just a very traumatic event. And back then, they didn't do a lot of counseling. So all of these issues were going on at home. I was just really feeling very unsafe, and I think just worried about what was going to happen in my family. So I didn't want to go to school. So my truancy started in fourth grade. I would just leave to go to school, but I would end up hiding out in our carport that we had, or in the woods or somewhere. But I was truant so many days I had to repeat fifth grade. And then by the time I got to middle school, I was pretty much lost and I checked out. So all it took was meeting a guy, this boyfriend that you'll see in the picture over here, Kevin. He was 5 years older. He was a dropout already, and convinced me I needed to leave home with him. And why I did it, I don't know. I guess I needed a way out. And I just thought, sounds good, sure. Well, we ended up in Canada, and then in Vermont, where I got caught by the police because they had this picture and they identified me, and came back home very shortly And by the time the next school year started, high school, don't ask me how I got promoted because I dropped out of 8th grade with almost all Fs. So somehow I got into high school and I lasted 4 days. And then we left. He pulled up in a car. I had nothing packed. I didn't even know we were leaving that day. And he said, "We're leaving for good. Just get in the car." So we left and I ended up in Maine, lived in Maine for 7 years, and I learned a lot of survival skills. So I missed a lot of education, not going to high school, but I learned a lot about how to hunt and how to split wood to make a fire. I learned how to survive in the cold when you had to live in your car because you had nowhere else to go. And then I ended up having children at a very young age. I was a teenager. So fast forward through a nightmare of an experience of being a young teen mom with a boyfriend who was mentally unstable and an alcoholic and abusive. And finally, I was able to escape all that. And I ended up divorcing at 19 with my 3 kids and then had to survive in poverty, living on welfare. And that taught me a lot. And I'm so glad I had that experience. I mean, now that I look back, it gave me a lot of empathy for a lot of the students that I ended up working with, just to be able to know what that's like to grow up living in poverty in Section 8 housing and depending on welfare. And this was a struggle for me as a single mom, but I ended up having somebody mentor me. She actually worked at the social services, and her name was Ileana. And if it wasn't for Ileana coming into my life and encouraging me to do something with my life and seeing a purpose and seeing that I had strengths, I may not have ever made it to get my GED, go on to college, and then end up turning my life around. So anyway, very quick story to kind of fill you in as to my experience and my background, and where I'm coming from to actually go into the field that I went into. It hasn't gone away. The dropout issue is just getting worse. And I feel that sometimes we don't focus enough on dropout prevention because of so many other issues, like you can see on here, the homelessness that kids are experiencing, mental health issues, and of course that all just escalated, after COVID. So my question is, what are we currently doing? I mean, we still have a major crisis, and you don't hear a lot of attention being given to the dropout problem. I think because teachers, you guys are overwhelmed. You are trying to help all these students and you have so many of them. And how would you ever know which ones are on the verge of just dropping out of school? And I know that you're constantly putting out fires every day because it is not an easy job. My oldest daughter is actually a middle school teacher, and I get filled in all the time about some of the stories of what she's experiencing. So I understand that it's very hard, but I think we need to do something. I just feel our schools could do more. These are just some other dropout facts that I just happened to find that maybe you could share with students, that sometimes kids are like, well, why bother going to school? Why can't I just drop out? What's wrong with that? And it's just some things, and I can share these with you if you email me. I can share my slides. But I just think it's interesting that just not having a high school diploma, how much less money that you can make or that you will make. So it really does change things when you graduate from high school. You have better opportunities. And once you can go on to some college or further education, it definitely does make a difference. And these kids don't really understand that. And especially when I worked in the prison population, it's so hard to convince some of them who have just pretty much given up on ever graduating, what good will it do? I'm not going to ever find a good job. And it's very uh, uh, frustrating, but also sad that we have so many kids that just feel like giving up. And I feel for them because I've been there and I know what that feels like. Um, so it does start with you. And my question to you, of course, you can't talk right out loud to me, but you can in the chat if you'd like respond to this. I put a fuel gauge up because I think that's a real good metaphor to look at where are educators at right now. If you were to look at this fuel gauge as your energy and your time and where you're at emotionally, where would you fall? And I'm guessing that most of us will feel like we're on empty or maybe even below empty because so many of you are experiencing the anxiety, the stress, the fear, the just irritability of working with people that don't understand you at all. And also added to that, just what you're going through, because everybody has a story. I'm not the only one. And I know that there are stories right here within all of you that are listening at every different state level. You each have a story. And I wish that more educators would be willing enough to share that and also get the support of others that, it's tough and you're having a tough time and you need some help. And so that you don't end up with compassion fatigue, which so many of educators are suffering from today because we just give, and you just don't feel like you're getting support back. So it does start with you, but it also starts with who you work for. It starts with the school. It starts with the district, the people over the school. I mean, it has to start at the top first, because if you don't have a supportive school and environment, it's going to just snowball from there. And I think that so many of us are running on fumes that if we don't do something drastic, like right away, to help our mental health and our well-being, it's going to be really hard to reach those students out there that are just struggling with so much. Like the professionals at my school, the teachers, the nurse. I spent a lot of time in the nurse's office, so they knew me really well. They had no clue what was going on in my home. Did they ever ask? Do you think when I was in middle school and constantly getting into trouble and doing things just to get into trouble because I couldn't stand being there and walked off campus most of the time? Nobody ever asked me, what's going on at home? I was never asked that question. I'm like, it's always, why are you such a problem? Why are you always getting into trouble? Why are you putting your parents through this? And so instead, the questions we need to ask is, what's going on? How are you doing? And as we all know, adolescents might say fine, but that's not always the truth. So it's really getting to the bottom of, what is going on with you? What's going on with your family? And then the question of how can I help? I think if we can get to that point. So if you look at motives that students have or they give for wanting to drop out of school, these look very familiar, because if you think about it, I think a lot of you are probably also feeling the same things that they're feeling. I think you would probably say you feel underappreciated a lot at school and you're stressed out. And maybe you're feeling kind of disconnected with your faculty, because I think if schools don't really work on relationships and really trying to bring people together, how are we ever going to do that with our students, especially teenagers? Because they can see when you do something differently from another teacher, and then those teachers talk about other teachers, And it just becomes a real problem when we're not practicing, what we're asking of the students. So they're overwhelmed. They feel no one cares. They feel lost. They don't know what their purpose is. And invisible. This is a real important word because so many of our kids feel very invisible. I felt invisible. I felt nobody even knew who I was. If I dropped out, they're not going to notice me gone. So I hate that we have kids in our school that are just lost and they feel like, nobody even notices them. And the feeling of being hopeless, excuse me for a minute, because I think you can also feel hopeless that it's not going to get any better, that you're not going to improve, that you don't have what it takes to really get through school or graduate or do well, hopeless that you're ever going to find a purpose in life or something that you have a goal to shoot toward, So I think those are all things that we're definitely feeling. And by sharing and feeling empathy for these students and sharing some of your experiences, um, don't feel that you can't do that because as a high school counselor, some of my other counselor colleagues were saying, I wouldn't talk to your kids about, your experience as a dropout because, you're going to encourage them to drop out. And, you can't really get into your personal life with your students. Well, maybe you were told that in your school, and maybe that's a policy. But I decided I was going to be very genuine and real with my kids. And I had students that came to me a lot because they knew that I was going to be truthful with them and honest with them. And if anything, encouraging them not to make the mistakes that I made and how hard I had it to get to where I finally got to in life. It was a long road and it was not an easy one. And so I think we can share those stories, and students really appreciate it when you're genuine and you can be honest and be real. For instance, I'm going to tell you about a student. This is a student that I actually talk about in my book. I have several stories in my book, by the way, that I share of students who have experienced dropping out. Some of them actually ended up going back to school after dropping out. So I have success stories and just to get insights into the dropouts themselves, which I felt was real important and really needed. And I didn't see a lot of dropout books that really talked about those who did drop out. So Renard was a teenager, 16. He was in high school, but the problem is his parents were moving every year. So every year they moved, he would just get to know friends and he would finally have some friends and his parents would have to move again. And this went on for years during his high school experience. So he found it very difficult because he wasn't able to connect with anyone. He had no connection. He had no friends that he could stick with because they had to move to another state. And this happened so much that he ended up getting involved with the wrong kind of kids. And he got involved with some gangs. One thing led to another. And he was also failing at the same time. He was not doing well in school, and he didn't feel like it was even worth being there, but he was still in high school. But then hanging out with the wrong kids got him into gang issues, and he even got shot at several times when he was 16. He experienced a lot that we probably would never experience. After being shot at and all that happened, he could not attend school. Now he was physically not able to attend. And he just became very depressed and he knew that he was failing anyway. And he said, why bother? I'm just going to drop out. And so he ended up dropping out of school. And a lot of it was just that feeling of, I'm not going to make it anyway. He didn't have any hope that he had a future in school, that he could ever graduate. And the sad part is nobody ever really contacted him. Nobody ever really called to check in on him. Nobody really reached out. And so that should say something. So anyway, that's what happened with Renard. And he ended up later actually doing very well because he decided that he wanted to later in life to do something with his life. It finally hit him, and he found an alternative school to go to. And this alternative school was completely different from public school. And he was finally feeling like people cared about him, and they were encouraging him every day to do better and to really work hard and giving him all the support he needed. And I thought to myself, why are our public schools not doing that? Why does a student have to go to an alternative school to get the services that our public schools should be giving? So anyway, he ended up staying and working at the school that he graduated from, and he now mentors other students. And what a perfect mentor that really understands where these kids are coming from. So if we look at the common reasons that students drop out, these are the common ones. Now, there are also some that we don't really talk about a lot because, there could be so many different reasons kids drop out, but just the ones that come up most in the research that I saw start with academic problems, but that starts way back in elementary school. So as soon as they start having academic trouble and they start, their grades start slipping, and especially if they're repeating a grade, that is a red flag that they're going to end up dropping out if they end up staying back. Feeling very disconnected, not involved in their school, and bullying is still an issue, even though we don't talk about that a lot either. And so there are a lot of kids who can't go to school. They fear that they're going to be bullied. And they're fearful of violence because we have so many violent things happening in our school today with shooters and everything. There's a lot of fear. And I think our students are just feeling it, the anxiety, the stress, the insecurity. Mental health is at an all-time high. And yet, what are our schools doing to address mental health? What is our country doing to address mental health? That's a whole other topic I won't get into. But I feel that we are really neglecting the problems that our kids are experiencing. Negative peer influence is very strong, and especially low hope. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. I have a short video that I would like to play for you that I thought was really pretty insightful. So I'm going to put that on, hopefully.
Every year, over 1 million students fail to finish high school.
Even kids in the most dire circumstances really want a future. They just need to have a path to it.
For 15 years, Robert Belfans, a leading education researcher, had been studying the population of children who drop out of high school. Then he realized that the key moment when kids begin to go down the wrong path was in middle school.
What does that refer to, Stephanie?
When 9 divides the parabola into 2 equal parts.
If in the middle grades you've developed habits of not coming to school regularly, of getting in trouble or failing your courses, you bring that with you to high school. And the schools aren't designed to help them succeed.
But how do you identify those middle school kids most at risk? What exactly are the warning signs? Belfans and his team harvested data from dozens of high-poverty schools where at least 40% of the students qualify for government-subsidized lunch.
We looked at about 40 different variables, and we put that into a big statistical analysis and said we want factors that are highly reliable and also yield a large number of kids in trouble.
And within this chaotic tangle of data, the team found something revealing.
And basically out of this mix, 4 came out really strong. And that was our sort of eureka moment. I saw kids waving their hands saying, help me stay on track.
The data showed that if a sixth grade child in a high poverty school attends school less than 80% of the time, or fails math or English, or receives an unsatisfactory behavior grade in a core course, that absent effective intervention, there is a 75% chance that they will drop out of high school.
It may seem far less than rocket science, but it's something that in fact schools by and large have not paid attention to.
Schools have long collected statistics on absences, behavior, and of course, grades. But many educators don't recognize the significance of those numbers. The principal of Middle School 244, Dolores Peterson, is one who did.
The Bell-France research was so interesting to us because we looked at it and we said, this is a great way to identify our students at a very early stage.
Students like Omarina Cabrera, who had been showing up late or not at all.
At the beginning, I felt alone and I felt ashamed and I didn't want to speak to anyone about it. I just isolated myself from everything and everyone.
But the data spoke for Omarina. Every week at Middle School 244, statistics are collected and reviewed by a team of counselors and teachers.
Attendance. Everyone's with me? Yes. Let's go to 802. Omarina. How is Omarina doing?
The students most in need are flagged.
Currently, her mother's not even in the United States right now. They were in a shelter not that long ago. Then they were evicted. So she's having to go between relatives. So they
And their assigned counselor organizes an intervention.
took her home one day, and it's it's a double commute. It's a bus to a train. It's on the other side of the world, you can say.
I can't tell you how much I worry every time she leaves this building.
When she leaves this building, you know, she's on her own.
Let her know that we're going to support her and keep us posted on what she needs. Our students face challenges sometimes that young children shouldn't have to face. And they need that support of the adult to help them through it.
It's all going to work out. And it's just
Catherine Miller was Omarina's homeroom teacher.
so once Omarina was identified, it was imperative on my part as a homeroom teacher in consultation with the guidance counselor and administration to discuss why she was coming in late so many times.
They came to me and they asked me, what's wrong? You've been late a lot. Something has to be wrong. And that's when I told Ms. Miller that I was evicted.
Your mother needs to feel safe, or she needs to feel good about where you are, as do you. And the best we can do right now, we can compile thousands of numbers about who's failing this or who's passing that. But if there's no response to that data, if there's no initiative taken to understand that data, it's all for naught.
It became clear that a chaotic home life was the source of Omarina's problem at school, and she needed targeted, practical support.
So you're going to take this one today.
The team helped her figure out routes to school from ever-changing addresses, got her a bus pass and books.
Ms. Miller told me that I can break through it, that I'm strong enough, that I'm courage to do it. And the fact that she believed in me, I believed in me. And that's something that not a lot of people go through. That's just happened.
They need an adult counterforce. Someone to say, did you get your work done? Let me make sure you understand it. And also deal with, like, I know you're having trouble with this teacher or that teacher or these kids. Let's work it out. Let's solve it now. It's that sense of shepherding is what the kids need to know that an adult not only cares, but the adult can actually help them.
How's it going at home?
It's good. It's not completely settled because of my mom, but I think it's calmer than before.
That's great. That's great.
I felt like, oop, I have to go to where I was. I felt like this was a really good video. I just love Omarina, and I bet all of you watching probably have an Omarina in your school. And I just, my heart went out to her because it's the same kind of thing that I experienced. nobody was really looking at why was she not attending school. I mean, our kids are truant and we don't really have time to look at why they are. I love what this school did. And you may be saying, oh my gosh, our school could never do this, or it's so time consuming. But in the long run, if you can at least red flag some of the students that you know are struggling and really need that extra help, and maybe your schools are doing that. We're going to get to that a little bit later. I just feel that we could be doing more and our schools could be helping these kids so much more than what we're doing. Because she could have very easily dropped out. I mean, especially with her circumstances. It's in kids who are homeless and dealing with issues like that. So I think intervening, and just listening and trying to find out. And if we don't have time to do that, we need to find mentors and peers in the school that can do that. So I have another story to share. This is about a girl, Cheyenne. These aren't real pictures of the people, by the way. But Cheyenne is a real student. She had problems from the beginning in elementary school, actually preschool. She was ADHD and very hyperactive, had trouble focusing. She had a father somewhat involved in her life, although she grew up with just her mom. And when she turned 7, her biological father, just kind of walked out. He didn't want anything to do with her anymore because it was going to be too much of a struggle to deal with her. So her mom had to do it by herself. And Cheyenne struggled all through school and somehow just got overlooked. So now we're in middle school. She starts having a lot of behavior problems. Well, actually, behavior problems started in elementary, carried through middle, but then it got a little bit more intense and a little bit more physical to the point where she was oppositional and defiant. So now they say, because it went to that point, she had to go to an alternative school because regular school wasn't working for her. And then in the alternative school, they tried to do a 504 plan. They tried to work something out, any kind of, special tutoring or whatever. But again, it was addressing all of the academic stuff and it was addressing somewhat of the problems, but not really looking at the bigger problem. And her mother, even though she tried her on different medications, it did not help. She just got more irritable and it was not a good fit for her. So by time high school came, she was now getting into legal trouble with the law and she ends up on house arrest. And now it was kind of during COVID, so they told her to do online school. Well, when you don't have a lot of self-discipline and your ADHD, it's kind of hard to do that. So she ended up just giving up and she said, it's not working for me. She ended up being kicked out of adult ed after they kicked her out of the alternative school. Cheyenne was the student who would have been a great candidate for a mentor, but no one ever thought to assign her a mentor because her mom was always at work and it was really hard for her to be there. And she needed somebody that could just be a role model, someone that could work one-on-one with her. And she just never got that. And unfortunately, it sent her off on a deep end somewhere, a deep end of a diving board that she didn't know where she was going. She could never set goals for herself. She didn't even know what she was going to be doing with her life if you asked her in 5 years. So she struggled a lot and ended up just leaving school altogether, never graduating, and struggling with keeping a job when she had to be independent because she couldn't keep a job for more than a few weeks. And then something would happen. And this happened over and over that she ended up, she was not able to keep a job. So Cheyenne is a kind of student that we see with a lot of kids that don't have goals. They can't complete high school. They don't really know what they want to do with their life. They don't have any motivation. And so you end up in jobs where, you know, you're not complying and you don't like being told what to do, and following rules. So she's another case of somebody that I believe lost hope in school forever. I don't think she would ever go back to school. I would hope she would, but I think Cheyenne just felt really almost dissed by the system, like nobody was there for her and nobody really helped her because she was such a behavior problem. They just wanted to kind of push her on. So unfortunately, I know her all too well because Cheyenne is my granddaughter, and I have not really had a lot of contact with her in the last year or two because she finally just had to move away and get away from the people that she was around, which may be a good thing, but I don't know what she's doing. And I just always hope that she's getting her life together and that someday we can reconnect. And it's sad when it's somebody in your family that you're, having to experience that with, but I'm sure I'm not alone. And some of you have had the same experience. It's really hard, even though I went to all the IEP meetings, I went to all the meetings with my daughter, and I tried to talk to the school about what I felt she needed. Sometimes it doesn't work when it's your own children or your own family members. It's very frustrating. And she would have ended up in the juvenile justice system if it hadn't been for COVID. That was the only reason she was kept out of that. But it's a situation where students are losing hope that school is really for them. They don't have hope that this is going to actually, help them and that they care about who they are, because sometimes they feel that schools are focused on those kids that do really well. They never get in trouble. They're athletes. They're, in the band, and they have all this going for them. And so they feel kind of lost and like nobody's really paying attention. In her situation, she really had low hope. I read a book not too long ago by Kathleen Beachboard. If you can get this book, you will really help your school and help yourself. There's a lot of great ideas in it, but it's called The School of Hope. And I love how she talks about kids who are low hope and kids who have high hope. And a low hope student, as she says here, has not discovered their personal strengths. They have difficulty setting goals. They set fewer, less challenging goals because they don't even believe that they're going to be able to achieve them. And they give up quickly. They give up way too quickly because they don't know how to face challenges. They haven't been taught the skills of what do I do? They haven't been told what their personal strengths are. They don't feel they know how to deal with problems. We have too many kids that I think are being rescued a lot today, to be honest with you, and they haven't even had an opportunity to face a challenge or to know what to do when there's a challenge in their life. And they're always looking for somebody else to solve their problems. So then you have they're afraid of failing and they don't try. So that means students need to be taught how to overcome challenges. And these are the skills. This is what we really need to be focused on. And they're social emotional skills. I know SEL has a bad name today, it seems like, because some schools are saying you can't even teach these skills. But all they are basic life skills that these kids missed. They never receive skills at home to teach them persistence, how to be determined, resourceful, having hopefulness, a purpose, support, connection, belonging, safety, security, self-confidence, self-worth. These are things that I struggled with, And it wasn't until later in my late teens that this mentor brought that out in me and said, you know, you really do have a gift and you have potential. Has anybody ever told you that you should go and get your GED? I didn't even know you could get a GED. Nobody ever told me that. And so I just needed somebody to really show that I had that in me. Um, and so I think SEL skills need to be taught to all of our students before academics, because if we don't have these basic skills, we're not going to do well academically either. Or when we graduate and these kids graduate and get a job somewhere and they don't have the basic social emotional skills to learn to work for an employer, I mean, it's going to cause a lot of problems. And a lot of companies are even saying they can't find people that will hang in there and be persistent and determined and all those skills that are needed. There is a national organization, SEL for US, and there's 25 states so far that have become part of the alliance for this organization. You may want to check it out, SEL for US, because the states that do participate, and you can go on their website and look at a map of what states do participate, then you have a state organization that you can be involved in, and they have resources for people that want to teach SEL in the schools. And there are a lot of good programs out there that you can find, but it's not really that difficult to teach kids just how to hang in there and how to solve problems. It takes a little bit of time on the school's end because you need to give that time in the beginning of school, or during class period or during an elective period, but somehow these kids need to be getting this. And I feel we need to be doing a mental health check-in with all kids in the beginning of every day, because too many times we've seen kids that we thought were okay and then they went off the deep end. And suicide rate in teenagers is terrible right now. It's so high. And a lot of people will always say, I didn't see the signs. I didn't see the red flags. So we need to really be doing more of those social emotional skills. Then let's see, next I have, how can you help? So first of all, I want you to think, I can't see everybody and we can't do this collectively, but you can do this yourself. Identify the most common reasons you see in your own school, whether you're in a middle school and kids are on the verge of dropping out or you're in high school. What are some of those issues or reasons that you're seeing? So looking at this list, maybe you could circle, check off, and just kind of look at which ones do you feel are the main issue with some of these students. Maybe you have a student in mind right now that is in your class and you know they're going to drop out. Think of that student. Have you found out what the underlying cause is? Have you talked to the student to see what is going on? And just like that student that was in the video I showed earlier, you know, it takes somebody just to sit down with them and ask, what's going on, you know, and how can we help you best? What are you struggling with? And it could be a home problem. It could be a relationship problem. It could just be that they're afraid to come to school, but at least get to the bottom of what it is. So some of the uncommon reasons that a student may not want to come to school anymore would be just that they feel school is not offering them anything that they can't get online. Too many of these students today feel their cell phone, this little device here, is probably just as good as going to classes, and I can just Google it and look up information. And so many kids just feel I'm not getting enough at school to really keep me there. And another thing is rules. There's a lot of students today that just don't want to follow rules. So they come to school and they have a lot of rules to follow, and they would rather not. So I thought running away from home, I wouldn't have to have any rules, but wow, did that change? That was an eye opener. It's like a whole new set of rules when you're out on your own, and these kids don't know that. They don't really know. And unless they can speak to someone that's been there, they're not going to grasp that it does help to be in school. There's so many good reasons and good services and resources that you can find in school that you're not going to find if you're not going. So then look at what your school is currently doing to encourage the students to at least show up. You know, at this point, you just want to get them there. You want to have them show up. So what is your school doing? Think about that as you go through these 5 things here that I listed. Is your school providing positive and supportive school climate that fosters healing and hope? Think about that for a minute. When students walk into the school, do they feel invited to the school? Do they feel like there's a supportive kind of atmosphere? Do they get positive messages from teachers? Do they get welcomed? Something as simple as a welcome. How are you doing today? Glad you came to school. Just something very basic. Is that the climate of your school? Think about it. Think if you were to survey your students right now at your school and ask them, how do you feel when you walk into school? Do you feel invited? Do you feel like you want to be there? I mean, I think that could really be insightful. And then helping students to find connection and purpose. The only way you're going to do that is to get, first of all, to know where they are and what their strengths are, because we don't do enough in our schools of really tapping students' personal strengths, and they all have strengths. Everyone has strengths. And so trying to help students know what their strengths are and then look at what are some connections, what are some things they could be involved in that could actually help give them a purpose and help them be involved. And access to support services. I can't tell you how many times I've asked students, who is your guidance counselor? And they have said, who? What? I didn't know we had a guidance counselor. Or I never see my guidance counselor. You know, it's like we don't make it easy enough to access support for our students. And I met recently with someone who's not even a teacher or a counselor. She's the secretary at the school. But she said they decided they would do a survey with every student in the school, and they would ask them, who is one person at your school that you feel you trust and you can talk to if you ever had to talk to somebody about something. And every student had to come up with a name. And I thought that's really a great idea because that's important. We need to be providing more support for our students and encouraging them to use their strengths when they're being faced with challenges, because their strengths are what are going to get them through their challenges. And if they know what their strengths are, then they can tap those when they need to. What is your school currently doing about dropout prevention? What is one effective approach your school's currently using? You might want to write that out somewhere. What is a less effective approach that maybe hasn't worked? And what could be a next step that you could start, a fresh approach that could help? And then really set a goal for when you could do this. How and when could you start this next step? I think it's important that we really come up with a concrete plan of how we're going to do something in our school. You know, unless you act and take the first initiative, it won't happen. We don't have a lot of time to go through these, so I'm not going to talk about all of them, but I just want you to know that I am a firm believer that we need peer helping programs in all of our schools. we are really missing the mark by not training our kids. And it is a training program. And yes, it takes maybe a little bit of time to put them through a training. But when you have the right students that represent all the social groups, and you're training these students, and especially some of them who have had trouble themselves, and they are out there helping their peers, you're going to see that there'll be less people coming to the guidance office. There'll be less students with a lot of the problems that seem to be reoccurring, and you're dealing with those all the time. And I guarantee you that a strong peer helping program will make a huge difference, because these are students that will be right there. They know what's going on with their peers, and they're going to be the first to know when there's a problem. There are training steps. You can go to NAPPP, the National Peer Helper, I don't know, NAPPP. I have it in my, I can give you the whole name later. But anyway, there is a national organization. Unfortunately, they give a lot of training that is like what they feel you have to do. And my husband and I decided to write a meaningful mentoring book and took all that training and condensed it into something very basic, very simple, in meaningful mentoring. And you could use that for either peer helping or peer mentoring, but it works. I've used it even at the prison level with juveniles at the prison, and it has made a difference. I still hear from some of those students that I trained 20 years ago as mentors that are all doing well, and how those skills help them all through their life. And also there's an organization, if you haven't heard of the PACT, P-A-C-T, about the 3 doctors, just Google it and look them up. They really promote peer leadership programs, and I would encourage you to look them up. Their story is incredible, and they have a book that I ended up getting for a lot of my kids that I worked with. So I would encourage you to look them up. I just am very intrigued by the 3 doctors and how their life started out, because it wasn't that easy. So I really liked this quote in particular. And this came from, I think you say Brené Brown. But when you think about what we are really doing to help our students, oops, sorry, I went forward. This kind of sums it up. I felt like this was a really good quote. And I think kids love inspirational quotes. Maybe you could ask your students to even come up with a quote each day. You could put one up on your whiteboard, or put it somewhere visible in the room. But I just think if students took part in doing that, and they felt they were contributing to the climate and to the classroom, and what, just giving contributing, I think it would really make a difference. You need to find a way to reach out and to link up, because these students really need you, and they need you to get to the bottom of what's going on with them. And they want the help, even if they don't seem like they do. They want the help. I just wanted to list some of the books that I have. If you are interested in my entire memoir, I did write Breaking Free, and that is the memoir of my life. I decided finally to write that. And then this book on what to do when a peer is in crisis is all about helping students to find what red flags to look for and what they can do if they ever meet a student in crisis. And then the meaningful mentoring, it's a training, very basic, that you can use. And then, of course, my new book, Confronting the Dropout Crisis. I have a website, don'tdropout.org, real easy, and I hope that you go to it. I'd love your feedback on it. I try to provide information for educators, but also for the students themselves. And I'm looking for stories that I can actually put on there to help encourage students as well. And then I've included my email and a QR code. But I really appreciate you all coming. I know I had to go through this quickly, but I hope you got something out of this. Please feel free to email me, and if you have questions, I would love to answer them.
And then I did see a question come through from Kenneth. And so go ahead and drop any other questions. We got a couple minutes. So how much do you feel is a staffing issue?
A staffing issue?
Mm-hmm.
Well, because we are losing so many teachers today, I do know that schools are really struggling with not having enough staff, and teachers are feeling pulled in so many directions that I think that is creating a problem. I'm not sure if that's exactly what they were asking, but I think that we need to do a better job of supporting our teachers, giving them the support they need, but also hiring the right staff that go with the population, not just because we're desperate and we need staff at the school. And training is the only way you do that. You need to have really good people to come in and train your staff. But I don't know if that answered the question or not.
Mm-hmm. All right, and then we had a question from Paige. How do you help a student that has clearly been pushed through the grades and is grades behind in their skills?
I think for a student like that, sometimes you've got to meet them where they're at, and it might be that they have to do online learning to get caught up. And they need definitely a peer tutor or some kind of a tutoring program, and maybe after school programs, because those are very successful as well. But you have to meet them where they're at and work with them one-on-one. It's the only way they're ever going to get caught up. And I'm not saying every student should graduate high school, like graduate. They could also get a GED if that is a better option. And I think you have to look at a lot of factors to see what is the best. I mean, if this student is like already 18 years old and they're 2 years behind. I mean, there are cases where it's too difficult for them to stay in high school. But at least get them their GED, at least get them to graduate. There's a lot of good programs out there, and I have a bunch listed on my website if you go to that, where you can get some help, and maybe that student needs to altogether go to one of these schools because that's what they really specialize in.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And we are out of time today, so that is going to be all we have time for. But if you do have any questions that we didn't get to today, feel free to send them to us at info@corwin.com. You also have Susan's contact information, so you can email her directly, and those will get answered for you. But thank you so much again, Susan, and thank you to everyone who joined us and participated today. And I hope that you all have a great rest of your week. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
So much. Thank you.